I've betrayed myself deeply over the past 10 years. I've betrayed my true self. I've wondered or thought deeply about this. I think it's time to address it. And I guess to go over how we got to this point. I've hurt myself not going for the things I truly wanted, going for just the things that I believe other people believed it was good for me. Other people wanted what other people's expectations of me wanted, but after time and time again, I've come to this conclusion for now multiple periods. It's still not what I want. No amount of work, effort could get me to want the things that they wanted for, or the things they wanted from me. Uh, so I guess we'll start from the beginning. I grew up in a very traditional Chinese household. My parents were immigrants to the U.S., first generation immigrants, and we moved to Virginia, small town in Virginia, right next to a very, I guess, popular base called Quantico. If you know, you know. But we resided there, and I basically grew up in a in a very typical Chinese household. Grew in an area that was pretty much non-existent of Asians, except one place. Um, I guess I'll go back to it, but I think for the most part, I don't think my story is much different from anyone else's from my background. But it's also because of that I feel I still need to address it, as I believe it's still the same sentiment in our community that the idea to pursue something that is not within pre-notion of what success entails for a typical Asian person is immediately seen as failure. And that may have seemed true back then, but as I've gotten older and I've seen more, and I've met more people who beat those notions down, that I believe we, I believe that for my purpose on this earth, is that I should be pursuing what has been generally kept in my heart, something I've wanted to pursue. But going back to it, I guess we could start from the beginning. So my parents came by plane from China to the U.S. in the 90s. So back then it was still um, immigrants going from various parts of the U.S. We moved to an area that was, I guess, more popular with first generation immigrants. That's besides Chinese. It was pretty much you had your Nigerians, you had your Mexicans, etc., etc. This is where we grew up. So, and that part of Virginia, small town, and it just had very low costs, where it attracted a lot of immigrants to move there. I grew up there in a predominantly Hispanic and Black area, um, and I grew up mainly as literally the only Asian person in my area. My parents, to be honest, did not like where they lived for the longest time. I'm like, yeah, they really didn't. They wanted the same typical thing, the same typical American dream, I guess. Um, Nice house, picket fence. I think that's what a lot of immigrants want. Uh, and so to get that, they believed, and it was still to me that there was only a couple things in life I could pursue at all. And that was pretty much ingrained into me since I was young. And so I've long knew that what I pursue, what I currently pursued, what I am, uh, as of until recent, uh, I knew literally long before I even entered school, uh, long before the idea concept of work was, those things were already predestined long before me. Um, but as I deeply ponder about this, and honestly reflect, I will never blame them. I cannot blame them, but I just won't blame them for that. As in the end, it's still my choice. It's still my life. Um, but I followed their path. They came to the U.S. with no English and no money, um, and they started really as typical American as you could start, working at the back of McDonald's, sweeping floor. Um, I think my mom was actually a waitress at a Chinese restaurant, but there they found community or whatever resembled community in the local church on base. And so base they still had a small, very small um, Christian church. It's a Cantonese speaking church with many residents from Hong Kong. I think everyone else was from Hong Kong, but there we had what resembled of a community for a very short period of our lives. Eventually, that community moved out from the area, very much so to get to a much better area. But my family stayed in that area, and we would continue on based on the values that still from that community, from where they grew up, we still continued. And so, as I talk about what is this path that was predestined to live, for me, frankly, is to be an engineer. So, as the common trope of doctor, lawyer, engineer. Uh, my grandma was a doctor before, and I got to experience what it would be like working as a doctor, just watching her life, to know that I just desperately didn't want to. Like, I got to see surgery when I was super young, so that was just not appealing in the slightest. Um, and like, I was just never a talker. I was pretty much a complete introvert. So the only route for me was engineer, or so I thought. But I continued on then. And so essentially, we pursued the math sciences, and I became literally number one or number two uh, person in academics for both elementary and middle school. High school became more deviated on that, but it's a mixture of relentless hard work, relentless amounts of reading, relentless amounts of doing the same boring things day in, day out, hours at a time. Plus, then you add in all the stereotypical other things that um, an Asian family would want you. So piano, violin, and I did that. So I tried piano. I think I was just too small, and my hands were just so stubby. I was frustrated, but my parents saw it as not immediate success, so they stopped that. Violin, they saw that, but frankly, I hated violin. Every second I played, and that was over for 5, 6 years. So, um, I think you can start seeing the point. I'm seeing this point right now, and it clearly is that there are many things in my life I was so disingenuous with myself, um, and it's hurt me deeply. And I'm trying to address it right now, where maybe if I was just a little bit more honest with myself, what I really wanted, and maybe had some balls up, to stand up for myself, it would have been addressed much earlier. But there's just I to be able to do things year in year out, things I knew about my heart I never wanted. At no point addressed that I wanted, and yet relentlessly still pursue it. As I guess has kept me dissatisfied, sad, but more or less not honest with myself. Uh, and I just wish I just been that really just been honest with myself. So staying on to high school. High school is where the gas pedal stop. That not it does not mean I didn't try. Rather, I was initially supposed to go to my primary school, high school in our area, but my parents relented as my school area was, let's say, statistically really bad. Not the best schools. Probably the worst schools in our area. Um, but there's something called programming that my parents heard of, as my parents were not of the sort background. And so they wanted me to pursue that, as that sounded a good idea. So we had transferred myself to probably, I guess, the other side of town, to this school where they were one of two designated IT schools in our entire county. And so we decided to go that route, or I followed what they just suggested. And it became 4 years of very long bus trips in the morning, very long bus trips back. Um, and a lot of time making new friends, as we just didn't grow up with them like I would have if I stayed at my current place. But we went there, and then I would eventually join. I would eventually join a programming class, which was the whole intention of that endeavor to change residencies to this different school. There, I was very fortunate to find that it was really only in hindsight now, but because there's pretty much so few resources for to learn any sort of IT, whatnot. It seems the schools pulled out all their best efforts to focus on a few of the schools that have some success, and so basically you had basically all the nerds who were part of this district were not pulled in. But I did have a very good room of classmates who were very good or very apt for this type of thing. And so I continued on with this thing called programming. And to be honest, I did decent enough at it. And I think it was a mixture of me doing work, but also just being around incredibly capable people, incredible people who love this activity, and to learn the skill set, and to just be in an incredible group, which I previously did not have, but it definitely helped. Maybe think this was possible, but at the same time, at the back of my head, I knew. I guess I was on the timeline, or maybe a clock, because at the end of the day, I knew I didn't really like it, but things were working out. It was a mixture of the environment being just so good to improve quickly that I could delude myself into thinking this would be it. But at the heart of it, I never really cared for it. Really didn't. Uh, and I would persist on to the point where our team would compete year after year for these international programming competitions. And eventually, our final year, which was also my senior year, that we did get to the finals, which would be hosted at MIT, competing of the best teams in the United States, not in the United States, in the world. And unfortunately, for at least that certain event, it was also not just that year, but also that week where we had the biggest snowstorm on the East Coast that closed off all the roads across the entire East Coast, especially Northeast, for over a week. So nothing came out of that, unfortunately. But even then, I knew this was This is something that was working. But at the end of the day, I still didn't want to do this. I really didn't. But it continued on. High school passed, and I continued doing, or I guess I basically went to college at my school at State College, and I picked my major as I guess it seemed logically to fit, as I already did it for 4 years. Might as well continue it. But it's crazy. I think back that you can delude yourself for so long. Sometimes you could put your head down and just keep pushing, but at the center of this, either it can't work, or rather, you're literally placing on a chance that's so little, and at the heart of it, you don't want to work to that chance, as it may be too difficult, or rather, it's something you don't just genuinely want. But I pushed that. So I continued through programming in college. What happened was that at the same time, I found dance, and that would be my lifeblood outside of school. What initially wanted it for me was maybe to honestly impress girls. Became like, I don't know if it's a weird cope or not. What would happen is that I would take the classes there, stress stress my life off of them, and then just go to dance and then just practice, with the hope that I would have this job lined up after college if I just put in the work, find meet the right people. But at the same time, all that to fund into what my current passion was dance. But what really it was just an escape from my problems, which was I still did not want to do with the thing I was doing, which was pursue engineering, pursue programming, pursue that. And so dance was easy out for me, as To be honest, I felt very comfortable. There was the first time in my life a lot of Asian people there, and so it's easy to connect, and they were very inviting, and so it became a nice way to mainly hang out, and that's what I did, hang out, and then we just put ourselves into the studios and just practice, practice, practice. But at the end of the day, I can only realize this in hindsight. It was that it was just a pure cope that I, at the heart of it, did not address the problems I still had years before, and this would still persist on throughout college. College would persist on from there to, I guess, after college, because at the beginning point where things were supposed to ramp up for me to go into corporate, COVID happened, and so a lot of things that we had already set in place of having an internship lined up was canceled, and other avenues stopped. That's where I eventually was given an offer by a friend to join their startup, and that's what I did, and we relentlessly pursued. But uh, I I still just wasn't honest with myself. I was doing the work. I was putting more hours in. I was spending a long time doing this, hoping to see some uh, fruit, the fruits of my labor over a long enough time. But I think I just never addressed the part of like I was just not ever honest with myself. Because even as we transitioned from college to after college to these startups, where I was at the beginning in charge of, I was hired as a developer. That transitioned out, and I did everything not to develop. Go figure. You spend all those years, it's been almost 4 years, and you don't even want to touch it. But we did everything besides programming, and I deluded myself into doing things, and to avoid that, and deluded myself in the thing I was participating, which was this first startup that had no traction really for the entire time we operated. And you can delude yourself for so long. And unfortunately, things happened in COVID where I could still work another job to afford this to continue pursuing this startup, as I was working this, not necessarily a remote job, but it was this IT support desk role. Um, and COVID had transitioned the stuff into more or less hybrid, or some positions remote. But what happened was that some of the higher management stuff became completely remote and lacked any oversight. So there are roles where I partook in, which they had no supervision. So I treated a fully on campus role as a purely remote. And it seems that never caught wind until the very end, which by then, which was thankfully good for me, as I was to support myself, continue startups. Uh, but as that first startup failed, objectively failed, we sold the IP to our one of our customers. But for all the work that was put in, and there's really no payout at the end, uh, we originally planned to transition just back to corporate. But then we tried one last attempt to see if startups was it. So we did that, and that became quite blazingly a success. Um, but it was interesting. It's basically 18 months for a startup, literally no traction, riding on blind hope, deluding yourself this is gonna work until you had to face the fact that like no money's coming in. We're all out of money at this point, and people have quit. So when the second time came, traction blew up. We found product market fit. I kept grinding away, I knew something was wrong, but I guess I couldn't be honest with myself. Is that as that thing grew, and what it took 18 months for some recurring revenue, for any recurring revenue, it only took less than a week to get our first $1,000 in recurring revenue. And it blew my mind was that I remember at the end, I remember that day, um, literally the first day we operated that, I mean, we got maybe $200 in revenue. My roommate, my co-founder was so hyped. This was maybe like 11:30 p.m. We're exhausted. Um, our orders have been fulfilled through our delivery startup, and is ecstatic. And I just could not feel anything, which is crazy. All this work to finally see success, but only to feel that this thing was not what you wanted. And there, my words were, "All right, what's the next thing we need to do?" You could say maybe I wasn't appreciated, fact, or I still think it's more of a fact. And I now actually do know that it's like I just never cared. This is still not what I wanted. This was just something that I guess made sense depending on my pathway. Become an engineer, go into corporate, live a happy life. That didn't work out because of COVID, and so I had to drastically change plans to find work. I did find work, but it just I could not find any fulfillment in that. There's no satisfaction, which should be a monumentous point for any entrepreneur to finally put all their effort to finally make real money, to see that money coming in, day out, consistently, and to see that it is growing quite quickly. And yet there's no satisfaction in my heart. And so even then, I just kept chugging along for over another year and a half, basically. Just kept digging myself in the weed works, grinding it out. And for me, it just felt like a grind. It didn't. It was not the same for my partner, especially when we found that initial success. To see that finally, after all the hard work, finally it was something working, and it was ecstatic day in day out. But that was not the case. I was just not into it. But as the end of our startup, when investors pulled back and basically killed us, and we had to recoup whatever money to save against inflation rates, um, and competition, really. I basically became unemployed yet again. I moved back to my parents. It was only at this point I think I came down to the rabbit hole that this was not what I wanted in my life at all. It was still something just maybe to impress me or to exceed my parents' expectations of me. But at the heart of it is not what I wanted. It was not my true self. And I can only realize this after deep reflection over the past way over a decade now, um, of grinding it day in, day out to find that I still believe that I have a purpose on this earth, and that purpose is not aligned to what my parents' expectations of me. Um, and so that became the catalyst to why I ultimately decided to move to LA. Not on a whim. I basically got kicked out of my family. I got kicked out of my parents' house. Shacked up with some friends for a while before I went moved in with my cousin. My cousin, I basically paid this coach who basically helped speak into existence that I could generally go after what I wanted. To be honest with myself, to generally go after what I wanted. So that became a catalyst of what made me move all the way to the West Coast, with no prior experience, and just go for it. I remember literally the day before I was gonna move, I had met with my parents after not having talked for about a month, and they gave me like this interview about what I was gonna do, what was my plan. It was a mixture of a quick argument with the realization that I was going to do this, a long 3-hour interview of what would happen next. And I drove all the way from Virginia all the way to LA. And I'm currently here just wondering what my purpose is. There's things I've been doing during that time, but there's some remnants of like, what am I need to be honest with myself about this. I don't know where this is heading right now, but this is long. I don't know if this is still running, but if you guys are interested, subscribe and let me know what you want. Cool. Peace out. This is Jack signing out.